Hello, I am Reverend Irene Smith, and I'd like to welcome you to Generationally Speaking. Here at the table, we come and we discuss life issues, no matter what they might be. As we sit at the table with each generation, we all learn, we all grow, we all are inspired.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Generationally Speaking. Hello, I am Reverend Irene Smith, your host of Generationally Speaking, and I am so excited to welcome you to this show today. I know you're looking around for my co-hosts, Pastor Shamika and Minister James Durham. They won't be with me today, but trust me, they're not too far away. But I am excited to bring to the table a historian, civil rights advocate who God tapped at a young age to make a dent, make impact history. And so I'm excited today to bring to you Reverend Gerald Durley. And I'm just excited for Reverend Durley on today. He is in Atlanta, but in chatting with him, I'm here in Maryland, and I found out that he's well traveled, that he's even been through this area of the DMV. But I want you to get to know him, because I believe that when we sit at the table with generations, Generation X, Y, Z, baby boomers, that silent generation, when we sit at the table with each other and we begin to listen, shoo, we can learn so much, we can grow, and we can be all that God has called us to be, and we can learn our history in a way that we never imagined. So sit with me, get your tea or whatever you're going to sip on, and let's listen to Reverend Durley share with us his life story. Just a small snippet of it, but enough to inspire you, to inform you, and then with inspiration and information to transform you, to inspire you to pursue your dream and your passion. So Reverend Durley, let me just say welcome. Hello to you. I am so excited to have this conversation with you.
This is probably one of the greatest days of my life, Reverend Smith, to be here with you. And the reason is because you're hitting on a topic that is so absolutely essential in a divided world. Generationally speaking, no tree can grow tall unless it has roots. And the roots run so deeply in the African-American community. Unfortunately, we're living in a time now where we're cutting those roots apart. But as you know, it's one thing to light the unity candle, but don't put out the other two candles that gave the unity. So I'm glad to be here on Generationally Speaking.
Thank you so much for taking up your time to be with us. I want to start off with introducing you, your formative years to our audience. I believe that our formative years, they inspire us to become. We have life lessons that we learn, and we don't necessarily realize it until we look back over those years. So I want you to talk to us about being a young male, African-American male, being raised in all places, Bakersfield, California.
Well, it's very interesting that we go back, because I think you're absolutely right. When you look at all of those individuals that we love and admire who've done so many things, it's only until you begin to see those formative years, what transpired them and the openness that they transform at every stage of life. I was actually born in Wichita, Kansas, grew up in that whole Kansas area. And then we moved to Bakersfield, California, in my early years. My father was a Church of Christ preacher, and he moved around a lot. So moved around from one place to the next while he was even a young man. So when we moved to Bakersfield, I started school in St. Louis, Missouri, and started school there in St. Louis. And in the third grade, we moved to Bakersfield. And in Bakersfield, as you know, Reverend Smith, we had an opportunity there. We were not wealthy. We lived at 1127 South, watch this, South Cottonwood Road. And what my brother and I did, we picked as so much cotton, we cut grapes, we dug potatoes, We loved tomatoes all during those formative years out there. And many of those that we worked with in the fields, of course, were from Mexico that didn't have the immigration laws that they have now. So working those hot fields, 103, 104, all the way up through those formative years in Bakersfield, California. And it taught me a lot about working with people, even though I was too young to understand the differences, because 100-pound sack of cotton, that's working all day. You get $3 for that. That's what they paid us. And then when you lug tomatoes, they gave you 8 cents a lug. And you had to go and put those tomatoes in a wooden lug box. And you learn lessons that you keep intact in your life. And when you are moving tomatoes, picking tomatoes, there's a crud that gets on your hands that sticks and it's almost, you can hardly move it. The only way to get it off is not soap and water, not any miracle drug. You have to take another tomato and the tomato acid will clean your hands from doing those things. So you learn those things and it lets you know, even when you get on up in life and things begin to crud your life, sometimes you got to go back to what got you there to remove you. Somebody might call it the critical race theory. You got to go back and understand all the crud that's on you. Sometimes you got to go back and use that to clean up your life and your direction.
That is so awesome. And so, Reverend Durley, when we, as African Americans, when we think about our history, we only associate cotton fields with Georgia, the Carolinas. We associate tomatoes with Virginia and those kinds of areas. But here you are in California as a young person out there in the fields, and you were out there in the fields with persons who did not speak the same language as you did. But you said that, and I read someplace in your writing that you said that there was a sense of connection that you felt with them. What was that connection?
One word, I believe, and I never really thought about it. I think the one word, survival. When you are in a survival, even though they spoke Spanish, we spoke English. When you're out there, and the survival was, in their cases, how did they make enough to take care of their families? In my case, I was much younger, but I was trying to make $3, $4, $5. And I think that that's key. When you find that you dwelling upon how do we survive, it's an interesting phenomenon, I think, Reverend Smith, that begins to take place that happened in the African-American community that made us strong. When we were all surviving, everybody had a responsibility to their neighbors, to their children. When I got out of line, Mrs. Bickham could put my little behind because she knew that my mother knew that she cared for me. So when you're out there in that field, it's 100-degree temperatures and weather, you got to be out there. And if somebody needs some water, you say, wait, no, you stay here, I'll go get it. And soon you're doing it, not because of differences in language or culture, but because you really want to survive. And I think that's, you don't know. It's an interesting thing about lessons learned in life. What I've learned over the years, you don't know really you're learning a lesson in life till you have to apply it years later. You're just doing what you have to do to make it through the day. And then 20 years later, you say, oh, and you hear people all the time say, my grandmother used to say, Daddy used to say, when Daddy was saying it, you didn't pay any attention. When Mama was saying it, you didn't pay it. So the lessons we learn in life, the lessons that I've learned over life, and even up to right now, are things that you go back and say, I remember when I was such and such. What really stopped me from doing certain things were things that messed me up while I was doing when I was so young. Yeah. I'll never forget, I coughed myself crazy trying to smoke a cool cigarette. So I've never smoked since then. Nothing wrong. I don't beat up people for not smoking, but it wasn't cancer. It was my remembering what I learned when I tried to impress somebody that didn't care anything about me. When I tried to smoke a cool cigarette and coughed and all of that. So, but it was a lesson learned. So out there in that field, I was learning lessons that I'm applying now in my age now, that I didn't really know that these were lessons to learn.
Yeah. And that object lesson of survival, that is something that we don't think about, but that's what we're all trying to do. No matter what race, no matter what your ethnicity might be, it's survival, trying to provide for your family, trying to make sure that you keep a roof over your head, food to eat, all of those things, which can lead you down different paths. But your parents obviously kept you in church.
Well, my daddy was a preacher. He was a minister, and I'll never forget. I was born in Wichita, Kansas, and he was 22. I think my mother was 17 or 18, and they had a little church in Pratt, Kansas. 9 members, and he'd drive from Pratt, Kansas from Wichita to Pratt, and was just sitting there. And he was like 20 years old. Also, he was a jazz musician, played the trumpet. And then finally they told him, if you know anything about the Church of Christ, and I don't mean to, they're very extremely conservative, very conservative. So consequently, as far as how women dress, no makeup, no lipstick, and no instrumental music. Even though he was a musician when he got into the church, he in the building, he would never play music. We walk right out of the building and he'd be right there playing the trumpet or playing with other people. So it's a conditioning that the discipline that you learn in your upbringing through the church. But I think sometimes, unless we're very careful, we can become so judgmental that we go beyond what God intended for us to grow and do, what God intended for all of us, regardless of our gender, because I've been in congregations where they don't want women to do anything. I think that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, because women they've always really been the bedrock. So consequently, I grew up kind of in that environment. And when I got to be, well, that's a long way down the road, about 30, they put me out. Yeah. They didn't put me out. They said they disassociated with me.
Oh, okay. So let's talk about you. You made it through those elementary years, that middle school and high school. Then you went off to college. What was the decision making, and what college did you go to?
I think it's very interesting. I started there in Bakersfield. Then we moved to Sacramento, which is the capital of California. Went to high school there and started playing a lot of basketball there. My brother was doing high jumping, and I used to watch this young kid about the same age as me jumping, and he started singing. His name was Johnny Mathis. He was a great high jumper. Johnny Mathis could jump 6'9" there in California. And then he went on. He left the broad high jumping and went into singing. We moved to Denver. When we moved to Denver, that was 1960. I finished high school in 1960. So I know your viewers are, let's see, how old is this guy? So go ahead and add it up. Last month, I was 80 years old. On May 11th, I was 80 years old. So now you don't have to say, how old is he? Where is he been? But in 1960, the Olympics came to Denver, Colorado, and we were playing the state championship. And we won the state championship, but that was a place where they were recruiting basketball players for the Olympic team. There was a man there named Johnny McClendon, Black coach who was coaching at Tennessee State University. And he said, have you ever thought about going to Tennessee State for a scholarship? I knew nothing about the South. I'd never been there and all this. And I was going to UCLA or one of the schools on the West Coast. And he said, why don't you go down for the summer? That was August of 1960. And that was the year that the Olympics and the great team, they had just finished the Rome Olympics. So I got on the bus going to Tennessee. When I got to the Tennessee State line, the bus driver came back and said, you'll have to move to the back of the bus now. And I said, huh? And there were two Black women sitting there, and they said, they were already in the back. And they said, come on back, young man. I said, no. He said, no, you'll be much more comfortable back there. Since I was 6'4.5", I thought the bus driver was being very nice, getting into Tennessee State, getting into Tennessee, giving me a better seat. So I went to the back of the bus, and the ladies told me, they said, you better stop getting, I said, ma'am, I wasn't getting sassy. I just told them I enjoyed the seat. We've been riding from Colorado, coming into Tennessee. I got in the back of the bus, got off at the bus station in Nashville, got ready to drink some water, but I saw two fountains. One was filthy. The other was fairly clean. So I got ready to drink out of the clean fountain. The man grabbed me by my neck and simply said, nigga, you don't drink out that water fountain. You drink out of this one. And I said, this one's filthy. He said, well, what do you think you're supposed to drink from? By that time, the coach came in and said, no, excuse me. No, he's with me. And took me to the campus. And I sit there in a quixotical kind of way, wondering what was all of this about? This has made no sense. And I said, well, okay. So we went on. I'm playing, there that first few weeks in school. School was not open. We were doing training. But somebody said, we're going down to the Greyhound bus station in Nashville. And this was down at Fisk University, only a few blocks away. And we're getting students to go down just to sit at these counters because they won't serve us. Now, I had to keep it straight in my mind. The coach told us, don't get involved in anything downtown. We're paying you to go to school here to get an education, and we want to win championships. Tennessee State had just won 3 with Dick Barnett and some of the great ball players. NAA championship. So I was a freshman. Now here, my roommate came in, and it was a guy named Ralph Boston. He had just won a gold medal in breaking Jesse Owens record. Wilma Rudolph and the girls were all there. So I'm saying, wait a minute. So I'm enjoying the gold medals on the table, but I went downtown, and that with the bus, and on that day, my life changed, and I think it still impacted my life many, many years, 60-something years, or 50-something, 60 years later, because I sat at a counter, and our job was to, may I have a donut and a cup of milk? That was what we would say. And I said, I'd like a donut and a cup of milk. And all we wanted to do was serve. We didn't want the donut nor the milk, just to be served. That was the goal. And they came out, and they brought a black man from the back with an old filthy apron on. And the white man took the donut and put it in my eye and threw the milk in my face. Not just mine, but all the 7 of us that were sitting there. Threw it in our face. And all the people in the state, they were just laughing at us. But they came, we went out, and by that time, and many of us, 2 things that I have to say about those of us who were students: we were not nonviolent, and we were afraid. So say you were nonviolent. No, I didn't want anybody kicking me around. I was all city, all state in Denver, Colorado. I had the great nickname, the double defensive, delectable, darling, dynamic, dangerous, devastating D from Denver. I was like any other young 18-year-old. And here's somebody doing this to me. But they pulled us out, took us back to First Baptist Church, where Keller Miller Smith was an organizer up there near the campus, and said, if you can't stay calm, you go defeat the movement. So they put me on a job of what we call a Gestetner machine. That's when you cut a stencil, put blue ink in it, and you run off the stencils to pass out. And so that was kind of my initial orientation into the civil rights movement. Soon I began to understand the patience aspect, and I could go down and join the marches. And of course, as I stayed at Tennessee State, 63, I became student body leader, led all the students who went to the March on Washington, came back, got deeply involved in that. And then after the movement, we came back in 63 after the March on Washington. And I said, now we're really going to really get busy. But 2 months later, Kennedy was killed. So I had to do with the student body, the eulogy. It wasn't the eulogy, a memorial service for John Kennedy. By that time, I was deeply entrenched in the inequities and equalities of what was happening to Black folks in America. Kids from Colorado being out at 3 years of that. And I decided this is not right. So my goal to become a professional basketball player was my goal. I said, I'm leaving all this because I'll either kill somebody or somebody will kill me. But as you know, in your life, things happen in a Kairos time. When something just happens, I'm sitting my senior year in college after the March on Washington, and 2 people came to my dormitory room, 1 white man and 1 Black man. And the white man said, we'd like to speak to the student body here. And I simply said in a very polite way, we don't let white folks speak to us. You've been doing too much speaking. So the president took me to his house, said, at least listen to the man. So then they brought the Black man. The Black man said, I'll ask you 3 questions. Where have you been? How much money do you have? And who do you know? And I thought he was putting me down. I said, well, I got a few dollars from my financial aid. He said, have you been out of the country? I said, no. Do you know anybody important? Well, no. He said, you don't know anybody, you're broke, and you've never been into it. Why can't you listen to this white man? The Black man that was speaking, his name was Samuel DeWitt Proctor. He was assistant director. The white man was Sergeant Shriver. Sergeant Shriver had just started a program that his brother John Kennedy, who was just killed, started, called the Peace Corps. So I was in the first Peace Corps program after Sergeant Shriver listened to Sam Proctor that convinced me and moved to Nigeria in 1964.
We're going to back this story up because, first of all, it's rich. I mean, first of all, it's rich. As a college student going for a sit-in, because I don't think we always understand when we see it and we think, oh, look at them, they're so brave. But no. You touched on something. You said, no, I had fear. And when somebody put a donut in your face and throw milk in your face, your natural instinct is to push back. But you had to hold back. You all had to hold back that natural instinct to fight. But the mere fact when you walked through the door, you knew you were in this hostile environment and still you sat. What was it that gave students such strength to just say, I'm going to fight against what's instinctive inside of me, fear, and I'm going to sit?
I wish it was that easy. I wish I could give a pat answer. I think a lot of it is kind of, you have negative and positive peer pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you sit, you go in tonight, Dr. King always said later on in life, he and Andy and CT then will tell you that fairly easy. They will tell you that Dr. King says we might not come back tonight. Now, at the early stages, we weren't talking about not coming back. That if I thought for 1 minute that I would have been killed or put in jail, I must say that I wouldn't have gone. Because even the coach said, look, you don't want to lose your scholarship, because my goal was to be a pro ball player. So no, but I wanted to be with my friends and colleagues, and it was right. And the more I listened to what is a constitutional right to vote, then I said, first of all, it's morally, and I wasn't thinking at that time these words, morally and ethically right, constitutional right. I was going with my friends. We were going to go down, we were going to make a statement, and then come back to the dormitory.
Okay.
That's so that was kind of I think the motivating force. But when you go down there and you get the kind of abuse that you feel, then it becomes personal. But then every night, and all the way through the movement, that you had to be conditioned. You had to be conditioned. It was a nonviolent movement. Nonviolent. And if you can't, then you could do things on the campus or pass out water. So you've got to have that attitude. Even now, when we're doing the Dr. Kingian theory on nonviolence, they're training how to be nonviolent in the face of a George Floyd situation. So it was just more in your face then and more more violent. So it wasn't like we were brave. No, I was afraid every time. And I think my colleagues were, but we look at each other and then when we get back, and I think even today, there's a certain degree of release when you can find levity and humor. Mm-hmm. Dr. King, they'd come back, and I wasn't in on what you call the inner circle. That was Andy, John, CT, Bernard Lafayette, and that crowd. And Bernard was a young one, even in that group. But we could laugh about it. We could come back and say, man, did you see that? Oh, man, I was going to step and beat up old Bull Connor. No, you weren't. You weren't going to beat up. Shut up. Don't sit down. but then you get bold and you laugh about it. And then you have prayer. Yeah. Then you take it to God in prayer. And you thank God that you did come back. You thank God that he's a mighty good, merciful God. And then you say, God, what is it now that you have me to do? And I think it's that layering of behavior that begins to understand. And one of the things I've learned, even when I'm talking to you and when you're talking with me and the listeners, that before I can say anything, it's a thought in my head. And my thoughts become my words. And my words become my behavior. My behavior becomes my value. And my value becomes my destiny. So if my destiny is to have any kind of merit, it has to start with my thought. So our thinking was that yesterday is gone. We only have today and live for tomorrow.
Amen. So now, unlike today where, everything that happens is automatically seen and across the world and all of these things, but your parents, did they get wind of what you were doing?
Not really. First of all, my parents were in Colorado. They were in Colorado. And my mother nor my father ever attended college. So I did not get into that. I'd earned my doctorate degree. My mother never had a doctorate degree for 11 years after I had my doctorate degree from the University of Massachusetts. Never knew it because that was not important to me. So all of us in there, we were college students. They didn't want us to get involved with that. They knew the danger, particularly those that lived in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. Their parents knew because they grew up there. So they didn't want them to do that. Mine was too far. But again, going back to breaking news. The night in 1961, the night of the bombing of the bus and the burning of the bus going to Alabama, I was supposed to be on that bus. It was leaving Clement Hall at 6:00. I was in the gym shooting free throws. The coach kept me over and running and free. I missed the bus. Now, when I got back to the dorm, it was about 6:30. The bus left at 6:00 going on down to Alabama. That was the night. Now, my point in breaking news, we didn't know anything about that until the next morning. It happened at 11 o'clock the night before. Can you imagine 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, all night long had it been on CNN? We didn't know anything about it. We heard about it the next day on radio. Then they started showing bits and pieces. And some of us, I know I wasn't on that bus. And they brought him back, and Pauline Knight and some of the others we talked to. So it was a whole different kind of synergy and energy that motivated and moved us at that time.
Wow. So knowing that God, looking back, you can see the hand of God's protection on you because he had greater works for you. But as a student government, the president, student government president, and then being involved in these other civil rights acts, do you think that was the beginning of your training ground for the preparation for where God was going to propel you to?
Yes. I think because when I first got to Tennessee State, I was going to major in biology because everybody says, for some reason, our community, the three professions, a doctor, a lawyer, and a teacher. Doctor, lawyer, teacher. A lawyer, teacher, doctor. And so I got in with Ms. Adams and was a biology major. But Calvin Atchison, my major advisor, said, you need to, you like people, you work with people, you need to be a psychology major. And so I shifted from biology to psychology. And my shifting, because I was dealing with behavioral aspects and learning more about how people and why people and what do people, it moved. And then to tie in the actual action, it became the foundation, I think, of what I do today. Had I not gone into psychology and all that, I don't even think about pastoring over the years. It's one thing to know God. It's another thing to talk about God. It's another thing to talk all of the 66 books. But sometimes you've got to watch this word, you got to have a hermeneutical transfer to make it live in today's world. Today's world, you got to use some psychology. You got to use some of this. And I think the psychological with the spiritual can give you some more sustenance in what we have to do in today's world that is psychotic. So I think that God was planning all the way from the psychology even up through today, mixing those things and then giving the international travel to put it all together to find out that the suffering that we're going through, it's universal. Right. And I think that Dr. King really understood that because he says the number one song for Gandhi was When I Surveyed the Wondrous Cross. And Gandhi was Hindu, but Gandhi looked at the When I Surveyed, and King had to go to understand the nonviolence movement from Gandhi. Now that's an international connection when he and Coretta went there. So you begin so even though we were dealing with the civil rights and what we were facing, we were really, as Dr. King said, we were becoming the consciousness of America. We were becoming raising the kinds of issues. And you're not doing it for any egomaniacal point of view, but because there is something that convicts you, that says something is not right with that. Something is wrong. And then you have to make a decision. Is it my obligation or responsibility to get in there and make a difference? And then here's the two words that I think fueled us, and I think could fuel us even today.